right, so moving right along in Thomas Pynchon's novel Gravity's Rainbow. In this video, I want to discuss episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8. And they're not numbered in the book. You kind of have to find them and number them in sequence yourself, which I advise so that you can track where you're at. And then and most of these episodes are short, so that's why I'm bundling them together into one discussion. So with episode 5 now we are introduced to the characters of Roger Mexico and his girlfriend, Jessica Swanlake. And they are both military personnel. Roger Mexico is working for PSYOPs. As we'll find out, he's working for an organization called Pisces. And Pisces, which stands for Psychological Intelligence Schemes for Expediting Surrender. So it's PSYOPs. And keep in mind that the symbolism, the astrological symbolism for part 1, Beyond the Zero, is Pisces. And as we'll see, the imagery here that's associated with that sign of the zodiac, which has to do with death, the relationship of the ego to the transpersonal, boundary dissolution. It's governed by Neptune, which is also associated with boundary dissolution and spirituality, transpersonal and archetypal themes, psychic abilities. All those things are in these chapters, as we'll see. So Pynchon very consciously is following the symbolism of the astrological sign of Pisces, even though the events themselves take place, as we have stated, in December of 1944. And so in episode 5 then, when we meet them, they are attending a seance. I suppose, Pynchon doesn't explain why, but I suppose it's because Mexico, even though Mexico is a pure man of science, he's a statistician, and he feels a little out of place at Pisces because all the other men have psychic abilities. They all have different kinds of paranormal abilities. Some have telekinesis, some can do astral travel, and he's just a statistician, and he feels a bit out of place with them. But they may have sent him to investigate this seance, which is very brief. Pynchon doesn't go into a lot of detail about it, where this medium named Carol Eventier is channeling a spirit, a dead man, Roland Feldspath, I think, and his wife is alive, Selena, and so they're channeling him for a bit. Jessica is rather disrespectful. She's standing there nearby throwing darts at a dartboard on the wall. She's being very disrespectful. She doesn't seem to take it seriously at all. And then, confusingly, on page 33, the point of view suddenly shifts from her at the seance to Pirate Prentice. And so now we're looking out through his eyes. All of a sudden, it just says Pirate Prentice feels something of this. And Pirate Prentice now has been acting as a go-between for, remember, he's special ops, and he's acting as a go-between for Teddy Bloat, who we saw photographing Slothrop's possessions, and he's making microfilms, and he's giving these microfilms to Pirate Prentice, and he in turn hands them over to Roger Mexico. So Prentice is the go-between. And this, of course, this information Roger Mexico is giving back to Pisces, or what's also called the White Visitation, which houses the agency known as Pisces. So they're the same. And it's set up at a fictional hospital called St. Veronica's Hospital, where Dr. Pointsman is there, who is receiving these messages, the microfilms, studying Tyrone Slothrop, his actions, his whereabouts, the mystery of how it is that he's having sex with women in areas that, as soon as he leaves, a V-2 missile lands. And so Pointsman, who is a Pavlovian, obsessed with classical conditioning, wants to know what's going on with Slothrop. He's puzzled by this. And he doesn't know if Slothrop has some sort of a psychic ability or what. He does know that Slothrop was classically conditioned by one Dr. Yamf when he was an infant in the 1920s, and that's spelled J-A-M-F, which, according to Weisenberger in his commentary here, was a term coined by the jazz player Charlie Parker as a jive-ass motherfucker. So that's the name of the guy who LMAO, same type of mentality, who classically conditioned Slothrop, as we'll learn here. So the seance, and then Pirate Prentice is a little bit jealous of the love affair that's going on between Roger Mexico and Jessica Swan. Not that he wants Jessica necessarily, he just misses this girlfriend that he used to have. He's about 40-ish. He'd had a girlfriend like 8 years earlier, a major love affair, and it ended badly. And so we find him musing about that wistfully. And then we move to episode 6, where we have a close-up on Roger Mexico and Jessica Swan Lake. She's named, note, after Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake, in which a sorcerer transforms a woman into a swan. So Swan Lake, and them talking in the car as they're driving. It's still the same day. All these episodes take place so far on the same day, December 18th, although we're nearing, I think this episode is, actually 6 is at 1 a.m., I think, or close to it. So they're driving along at night and they're talking. And the thing about their relationship, though, and Prentice may or may not know this, I think he does, that there's a complication because Jessica Swan Lake is two-timing him. So she's a two-timing floozy, that one can't really have much sympathy for such a character. But her boyfriend, the other boyfriend, is a guy named Jeremy, but she calls him Beaver for some reason. It's an odd phrase to apply to a man, but so she calls him Beaver, and she sort of torments Roger. Sometimes she'll make a comment, "Oh, I wish I was cuddling with my beaver." So, and they have this house that they go to that's outside of town that they're not supposed to be in. They're trespassing on it, that they go to for their assignations. And then, so that's that chapter. Now, chapter 7, then, they reach their destination around 1 a.m., which is to meet up with Dr. Pointsman. Ed Pointsman is his name. And he's looking for a dog to classically condition, because what he's been doing all along, the good slavish Pavlovian that he is just repeating Pavlov's experiments over and over again with dogs. So he's at a site where earlier that day a V2 rocket had hit, and there's a stray dog running around loose. He's trying to catch it so he can do experiments on it. And of course, what Pavlov did with two classically conditioned dogs was to have them eat food, and then as they were being served the food, he would note that they would salivate. Then so he decided to add a metronome, and then so the metronome goes, the dog gets food, it salivates. Then he removes the food, and now there's just the metronome, so he lets the metronome go, and now the dog salivates without the primary stimulus there. So it's a very linear cause-effect type of thing. That's the thing to keep in mind about that sequence. Stimulus, response. The response follows the stimulus, as B follows A, according to the law of causality, which Pynchon is undermining here, as we'll see. So they show up, Roger and Jessica show up at this site. Roger has brought supplies to help Pointsman catch this dog, which is run down into a cellar in the bombed out ruins of this house. And Pointsman steps accidentally, as he's going down into the cellar, steps into a toilet bowl. And he's walking around with it on his foot. So I guess it's not the entire toilet, but it's some version of a small toilet bowl, and he cannot get it off his foot. And so he's trying to catch this dog hobbling around with the toilet bowl. And then they try fitting it into the car door and slamming the car door on it. It won't come off his fucking foot. Not gonna happen. So it's kind of a slapstick scene. So they go after the dog, and of course they end up, Roger and Pointsman end up tangled up in the net that they were going to use to catch it. So they end up tangled up in it, and they roll out. Then the sentry shows up and chases them away, because they're not supposed to be at this bombed out site doing this. And so they drop him off at St. Veronica's Hospital with the toilet bowl still on his foot. So he enters the hospital where he works to go and meet Dr. Kevin Spectro, who is the guy that he's working with. And they drop him off and then leave. So then it flows. Notice how these episodes flow, because the first time you read Gravity's Rainbow, it seems chaotic, and it seems like there's no narrative logic, but as a matter of fact there is, because each scene takes us to the character of it. From one character to the next, we move from Pirate Prentice to Roger Mexico and Jessica Swan Lake, and then to Dr. Pointsman, and then to Dr. Spectro, and then eventually back to Tyrone Slothrop again at St. Veronica's Hospital, where they have this program set up. And so then Chapter 8 takes place at the hospital. He's finally got the toilet bowl off of his foot, and he's sitting there talking with the guy that he works with, Dr. Kevin Spectro, about Slothrop. And Pointsman is really puzzled by this idea, two issues that seem to invert the cause and effect sequence of classical conditioning, which is, number one, how is it, this is them talking back and forth about Slothrop, how can it possibly be the case that Slothrop is at a location where a future rocket strike will happen, then he has sex with a woman, and then he leaves. Then the rocket strike invariably hits. That seems to upset the causal sequence, as does the literal fact of the rocket hitting first and then the sound coming after it. And Spectro is like, well, you're confusing cause and effect here. You have to keep, your stimulus and response here has been confused. And they're also talking about treating patients in the ward that they're treating them in. They're suffering from what we would now today call PTSD from the war, but back then they're calling it abreaction. Pierre Genet and Carl Jung also refer to it as abreaction, which is dealing with PTSD, where they would try to get, the psychoanalyst would try to get the patient to relive the experience that has traumatized them. And in reliving it, then it gets processed. But of course, Pavlov, writing to Genet, and there's a reference to this, Jung studied under Genet for about a year, it says that it should be done with drugs. It should be done with chemicals, not psychoanalysis. Pavlov was about the lowest level intellect that any man with a brain could have. This guy was just a dead, dry materialist, pure materialism. Doesn't even want to treat people with PTSD using psychotherapy because he doesn't know anything about it. So a really pathetic vision of the world Pavlov had, totally pathetic. So they're talking, they're going back and forth, and the thing that Pointsman wants is a human patient. He's tired of chasing around dogs. And he's telling this to Spectro, I need to perform my experiments on something else other than dogs. And he's tried keeping a dog outside the lab, but he doesn't like it because it barks too much, and it vomits on the floor, and it doesn't clean it up, and it opens the door to go outside, but it doesn't close the door behind it. So he just doesn't get the concept of having a pet. It's not working. And so he's telling this to Spectro, what I really want is I want to work on a human patient. Can't you provide me with that? What he really wants is Slothrop. Slothrop is what fascinates him. That's the one he really wants to study. And Spectro knows this. And they're getting all this information on Slothrop that Roger Mexico is giving them from Teddy Bloat. And so he says, well, I have an octopus named Grigory that I would like you to work on to perform your classical conditioning experiments. And Pointsman is like, an octopus? What can I do with an octopus? He's like, oh, they're quite complex. The whole thing is a parody, of course, of classical conditioning. You can't classically condition an octopus. I highly doubt it. But Spectro seems to think you can. And so he's selling Pointsman on this. Just take the octopus for now and work on it. And this will turn up later, the octopus. So that's how it ends in chapter 8. And notice that all the imagery is very Piscean. We get a sea creature. With the Pisces fish, we get the sea creature. We get individuals with paranormal abilities. And the seance. And all these Piscean themes are the leading organizing theme of part 1, Beyond the Zero. So keep all of that in mind. And next will be episode 9, which features a debate between Roger Mexico as a statistician against Pointsman, who is a strict determinist, a strict causal determinist.